a few minutes late. I'm still getting used to this live stuff. This is the second insert, and hello, my name is Deanna. I'm the PG Pathfinder, aka REGGIRT, and this is our second episode of Sunday Live, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with REGGIRT. For those of you who tuned in last Sunday, thank you very much for joining me. I'm still getting used to this live stuff on YouTube. Each social media outlet does it differently, and for those of you who had a chance to visit my Instagram page that I had, thank you very much for that. I'm moving a lot of my videos over from Instagram over to YouTube for your enjoyment because, doing the social media thing, I've come to learn that you have certain audiences that cater to certain social media outlets. And the reason why I'm looking down here is I'm just trying to make sure that I'm broadcasting properly. So give me just a second. I want to make sure that I'm looking okay. And I'm going to give people some time to come in, so I'm going to make sure that I am looking okay. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And I spoke last week in regards to, I gave a little bit of my background. And I spoke last week in regards to, I gave a little bit of my background. And I spoke last week in regards to, I gave a little bit of my background. And I spoke last week and what I'm going to do is elaborate a little bit on that, kind of get you a little bit of an idea of who I am and give you a chance to get to know me a little bit better. Okay. My name is Deanna. I am from Savannah, Georgia. I was born and raised there in 1968. Believe it or not. It was in the fall of 1968, November 1968, which makes me a Scorpio, on the cusp of Sagittarius. So, for those of you who are into astrology, I see some similarities with personality in regards to astrology. So, and by the way, if you hear a little bit of noise in the background, that is my significant other. He's doing some plumbing in the background. So I don't know if you're going to hear it in this live or not, but he's, doing some house stuff. He does that type of thing. So it's pretty handy. But anyway, I was born in Savannah, Georgia. And if you know anything about the 60s or 70s, that was during the time of desegregation after the Civil Rights Movement. And I was born into a very unusual family as far as our situation. Now, for those of you who know about the Civil Rights Movement, African Americans were finally out of the Jim Crow movement, where they were finally allowed equal rights as citizens, as far as, being able to have access to public facilities, access to education, access to equal job opportunities, just equal access. They were treated as equal citizens under the law. And thanks to Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, Medgar Evers, just numerous other people who, spearheaded the civil rights movement. They were able to pass the Civil Rights Act in 1962. And several years after that, a lot of Jim Crow laws were eliminated that were segregating African Americans from being able to have access to just basic things that people had access to in order to live a decent life. So desegregation was the time after that where it was a transition period. And sometimes, it was kind of hard. There was still that group of people that, just didn't transition, that didn't accept the transition very well. And there were two sets of African Americans that, they either accepted it and were willing to branch out and willing to embrace these changes and willing to adapt to the changes, and I was part of that group. And there was also that group of African Americans that were kind of scared and didn't want to accept the changes. They wanted it, but then they didn't. And they were kind of scared to branch out into it. Please excuse me, my hair is just itchy with these new braids, for those of you who know about braids. But anyway, so I'm going to be scratching my hair a lot. But anyway, so basically we were the guinea pigs as far as a lot was concerned. My father was a rock and roll DJ. He went into the radio business in the early 50s, and he was actually one of the first crossover DJs as far as introducing rock and roll to the American public. And for those of you who are into music history, rock and roll was one of those types of genres of music where it kind of bridged the gap between races. Up until then, you had a certain group of people that listened to a certain type of music, and then you had a certain group of people who listened to a certain type of music, and it wasn't publicly where both ethnicities listened to a certain type of music. It was underground, but it wasn't public, and rock and roll kind of bridged the gap. And my father was one of those people, and he was also African American, and he was one of those type of people that kind of brought rock and roll to the airwaves. And he was one of very few African American DJs in the state of Georgia that actually helped bring rock and roll to the airwaves. So he was one of the few in the late 50s. So, if you want to kind of look up, the history of rock and roll is very interesting. There were a lot of DJs. Alan Freed was one of them that was that was persecuted, suffered jail sentences, fines, from the powers that be, because they actually, they were protested, just like in the civil rights movement, because of their beliefs in regards to music, because they wanted to appeal to all races and all types of people. And the same thing happened in desegregation in regards to jobs, where people who wanted access to that, as far as jobs, as far as housing, there would be protests. Well, fortunately, because my father was in the business of dealing with different types of people, by the time I was as a child, coming up as a child in the early 70s, my father was able to communicate with people of different races because of the nature of his job. He dealt with sponsors and advertisers of different backgrounds. So because of that, he was able to make a lot of connections. And so when it was time for us to be able to get access to housing that other African Americans in my area weren't able to get access to, it wasn't as hard. Now, needless to say, it was still difficult, but it wasn't as hard for us. We still had our struggles. However, there were certain conditions that he did had to have to meet. So, we were like one of the first African American families to live in a predominantly white neighborhood. We lived in a luxury apartment complex at first, but then later on we wound up moving into an upper middle class neighborhood, which was predominantly, Anglo-Saxon. But by that time, that was in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was, started to be, mostly integrated by that time. But when I was a small child, when I started school, I didn't start in a public school. My parents wanted me to go to a private school because, again, they were able to, and again, welcome to those who are coming in. I'm not able to see who's coming in because I haven't gotten used to the lives, and I'm sorry about that. So once I get used to this and be able to see who's coming in, I'll be able to take a look and see who's visiting. But if you could identify yourself in the comments, I would appreciate that, because right now I don't know, how to work these lives very well. So once I become familiar with it, and I do apologize, I'll be able to give you a shout out. So I got to get used to all this. But thank you very much for coming. I do appreciate that. But I do see you. I see your little icon that you're there. I just don't know who you are right now. But anyway, back to my story. Um, the idea that I could go to a private school and living in a predominantly white neighborhood, my mother took the opportunity because I was a very precocious child. I was always, very, curious about nature and curious about life and everything else when I chose to speak. And that's a story I'm going to get into shortly. But she took the opportunity because we were making extra money. Instead of me going to a regular public school, she wanted me to go to a private school. And I was one of only three African American children in a private, predominantly white, um, Protestant school. And that was difficult for a small child because there were plenty of days that I would come home upset because I didn't understand why the children didn't like me, because I didn't understand at the time. But when I got a little bit older and started to learn my history, I put two and two together, and I understood why the children didn't like me. It was because of my skin color. But when you're 4 years old, 5 years old, you don't get it. But I mean, I still made friends, because I mean, for the most part, a lot of the kids were very welcoming because they were because they were Christian children, they were taught to be kind, but there were still one or two, and like I said, maybe one or two, that really just distanced themselves from me. And I mean, I didn't have to deal with any physical abuse or verbal abuse because, like I said, it was a Protestant school that was Christian, and I think my mother made it, did it that way so I wouldn't have to deal with physical or verbal abuse. If it was a regular private school that wasn't associated with the Christian faith, I probably would have had to deal with physical or verbal abuse. So that was very strategic on her part, and I applaud her for that. But still, I had to deal with a little bit of ostracism, but it wasn't that bad. So, backtracking a little bit before I started school, um, I have I had an older brother and myself at the time, and my older brother is 10 years older than me. And my older brother, if you excuse me, I'm working on my computer as well while I'm talking to you guys. My older brother followed in my father's footsteps eventually and went into the radio business and is still in the radio business and has been for over 50 years. Um, but my older brother and I were living in an apartment complex, so he was close to 11 years old by the time I was born, so there was a huge age gap between the both of us. So needless to say, I was a surprise baby. I was not expected at all. And based on what my mother told me when I was older, she wasn't expected to get pregnant at all after she had my brother. So, needless to say, I was a huge surprise. And there were some issues with me when I was coming up. I was fully functioning as a child, but there were some delays developmentally to where if these two things had occurred, I probably would have had to been taken to a therapist or something. But later on, when things occurred in my adult life, I found out what was going on with me. Um, One thing is that I had an attachment issue to my bottle, and I didn't know what that was about. But I mean, I was able to walk, and I was potty trained and everything else, but I was 3 years old, and I was just attached to my drinking bottle. Now I would drink out of a cup and drink out of a glass at the dinner table and everything else. But just in my free time, I would just walk around with this bottle, and it was just the sucking of the nipple and holding the bottle. And one day my mother told me, she said, I don't understand. She said, you're sitting at the table and you're drinking, and when we go out, you're drinking out of your sippy cup, you're drinking out of a regular glass, you're drinking out of, but when in your free time, you just get that bottle and you're picking up and you're drinking that bottle. She said, I want you to go throw that bottle away. Well, in our apartment complex, there was a big dumpster across the street. We call it a Dixie dumpster. And there's a big dumpster, like literally right across the parking lot. Now, see, back in the day, it wasn't an issue to let a little child walk across the parking lot as long as you were looking. Nowadays, you can't do that because they'll be ready to lock the child up and lock the parent up. But now, it wasn't an issue. So she told me, she said, what I want you to do, she said, I'm going to stand right here. She said, I want you to walk right over there and throw that bottle in the garbage. That's all she had to tell me to do. And so that's what I did is I got up and I went and I put the bottle in the garbage can. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put this bottle in the garbage can. And I did that, not thinking that there weren't any more bottles. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do what Mama said, but it didn't dawn on me there weren't any more bottles. And I'm like, okay. So when I realized later on there weren't any more bottles, I kind of panicked a little bit and started having crying fits. And that was a bit of an issue. But I calmed down and eventually realized, okay, this is another phase of my life where I'm going to have to be a big girl. Potty training wasn't an issue. I did potty training, breezed through it like a champ, like everybody else, like I was supposed to. I teethed, I went through teeth, and I was told that I did very well with that. All the different phases of growing up as a toddler, I did fine. It's just I had that attachment to the bottle, and it was more of an attachment issue. I found that out later on when I had to go to therapy, and I'll go into that later on in another video. because I want to talk about that when I start talking about, um, dependencies and anxiety disorders and things like that, because I want to talk about my story when I talk about that. Um, so that was one issue that I had. And another issue that I had before I went to school is that up until the time that I was 3 years old, I didn't speak. I made noises. I would say yes and no, but I wouldn't speak complete sentences. Like if someone spoke to me, excuse me, I would say hello, I would say goodbye, but I wouldn't speak whole sentences like I'm speaking with you now. And that really concerned my parents because they were wondering what was going on because they knew I was smart. Because I was literally reading in books. My mother would read to me and she would ask me, "Do you know what that word is?" And she would tell me to repeat it to her, and I would repeat words back to her. She was like, "That word is blue." And I was like, "Yes, blue." But as far as like someone talking to me and talking back, I wouldn't talk. And I wouldn't say full words and sentences. I would just, say one syllable words in response to people, but I wouldn't. And sometimes if somebody would look directly at me, I would get very anxious and I would start crying. I would have crying spells. And my mother would try to do different things because I was so introverted and shy. It's like someone trying to focus attention on me. It really scared me. People really scared me. And my parents just didn't know what to do. And I think just they didn't know what to do. And they would go to my grandmother, my mother's mother, who is a very spiritual person. And she was very wise. She came from the country. She came from Scriven County in Sylvania, which is not too far from Augusta. And she just always had a wise word for every situation. And she used to worry, and she said, "Well," she said, "I don't know what to do." She said, she just says little words, and then she grunts and makes these little funny noises all the time, and I don't know what to do." And she's 3 and she's almost 4 years old, and she knows how to read. She knows her colors. She knows her alphabets. She even knows how to take a pencil and draw. She's even, I'm teaching her how to color. And who is it? Your fave Harper. Hello, how are you? Thank you for putting your name in the comments. I appreciate that because I don't know how to do this live thing. Hello, how you doing, your fave Harper? Good morning to you and thank you for coming in. I appreciate you following me. But anyway, I'm telling you my little story here. But anyway, my grandmother would say, "Don't worry about it. Do we need to take her to a therapist?" I said, "Well, my grandmother keeps saying, don't worry about it, don't worry about it, don't worry about it." And they like, "Don't waste your money because when she starts talking, you ain't gonna shut her up. Or when she does talk, she's gonna say something that you're gonna wish she hadn't said." Well, from their mouths to God's ears, because the day came where it happened. This is the funny story. I must have been about, I want to say about 3.5, 4 years old now. In 1974, no, I want to say in 1974, my father became an ordained minister with the Southern Baptist Church. However, a couple years before that, he was always a guest speaker at different functions around Chatham County. That's where Savannah is. And of course, being a radio announcer, you're asked to, MC different functions and things like that. And he became a big name in the gospel community. He did R&B, but he felt more inclined to work with the gospel community, and of course he was led to a calling, and eventually became ordained. I want to say 73. Don't get me the line here, but anyway, I want to say 73 or 74. But this was around 1971 or 72, and please pardon that. That's the garage door. That, like I said, my partner's in and out the house working on the plumbing, so that's the garage door. We've got the female alarm system thing. But anyway, um, when he would have functions and stuff, sometimes it would be in the afternoon or in the evening. So if you're the daughter of a radio announcer and you're going to church on Sunday, our typical day was not a day like everybody else who goes to church on Sunday. You know, for some people, when they go to church on Sunday, they have maybe Sunday school in church and they're home by in the evening. It wasn't that way for me as a kid. My day of church would start as early as maybe 9 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes we don't get home until 9 or 10 o'clock at night because we would have, Sunday school and church at the family church. But then we would have to come home or go somewhere to eat or go to grandma's and get a plate or whatever the case may be, and then come home and maybe have to change clothes because dad's got to MC a function because there's a choir anniversary or a concert or something like that going on over at another church because he's got to go MC and we got to go there. So because we got to change clothes, of course, so we got to go there across town somewhere over in East Savannah, West Savannah, whatever the case may be, and that's a function that he's got to do. So he's got to be there, let's say at 3 o'clock. So he's got to do that, and that's a couple of hours. And most of the time, we only have one function that day, but sometimes it might be two. And then after that, then we have another break, and then we got to go eat, and then sometimes we'll go change clothes, sometimes we won't. And then he might have another function at 7 o'clock where there's a concert because there's some groups in town. Some gospel group is performing at another church, or a singer or something, or somebody that he's trying to help promote locally. And we've got to go, you know. And so we won't get home till 9 or 10 o'clock. But this is not every single day. This is just on occasion. There have been times where I've been pulled out of school, and I see somebody else has come in too. If you could put your name down in the comments because I can't see you, that would be great. But welcome, whoever you are. Thank you for coming in. I was just telling my story about a typical Sunday. But there have been times too where I was in school, and let's say he has a gig out of town and we got to be out of town for the weekend, but he's got to leave on Friday because he's got to rehearse with whoever it is on Saturday for the gig on Sunday. I've been pulled out of school early just so we could hit the road, so we could be wherever we need to be for whatever it is we need to do for this gig or whatever, or he's got to see a client or whatever case may be. So it wasn't a typical life for me. So you would think that I would be an outgoing person doing all that, but I was actually very shy dealing with people when I was very small, very introverted, very shy. So I was very, very quiet, even though we presented ourselves very well and we were picture perfect. I was still very mannerable to people, but I was very soft spoken. I was still very kind of, kind of very closed off and just very quiet. I didn't come out of my shell until I was a teenager, but I was just one of those type of people. It took a very, very long time for me to get out of it. And what got me out of my shell one day is that one particular Sunday that we had was very hectic. And I think we had just come home and my dad was changing clothes or something. And I think he was trying to get dressed or something like that. And I forgot what it was. And I don't know what it was. But he said that he was going to do something. He said that he was going to do something to me. This is what made me open my mouth and say something to him. And here comes person number 3, number 2, okay, whoever it was that came in, hello, goodbye, thank you for coming. Um, he said that he was going, no, he threatened to spank me for something that I didn't do. And I told him, I said, no, you're not. Yeah, he said something about, I think he accused me of doing something that I didn't need to do. I don't know what it was. I wish my grandmother was here, God rest her soul, to tell the story. But in order to get me to talk, I was accused of something that I didn't do. I must have been about 3 or 4 years old because it was before I started school, of course. I had to been 3. He's like, you did something, oh, I'm going to spank you for doing so and so. I'll be like, oh, no, you're not. And I think for the fact that I said it and said it so sternly and so clearly, the act of whatever it was that he accused me of, he was just so happy of the fact that I just started talking. And then my mother said, "What did you say?" "Well, Daddy said da 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 da, and I didn't do it, and I didn't, and that's not right." And I just started talking and talking and talking and talking, and my parents were just so happy that I said something fluently that they told my grandmother, and my grandmother bust out laughing, and she said, "What I tell y'all?" So ever since then, it's just been a freight train. And I'm the type of person, if I'm quiet, I'm quiet. But once I get started, don't get me to shut up. But also too, I'm not the type of person that when I say something, I'm just not talking to be, you know, talking mess either. I try to have meaning behind what I say. But that's a cute little story behind that. But by today's standards, if I was three, if the average child was 3 years old and didn't say anything, they'd probably been taking all these therapists and everything else. So I'm glad my parents didn't waste any money. But I did find out later on, because of the crying spells and the introversion and the problems with the talking, those were symptoms of an anxiety disorder that I was later on diagnosed with, in my adult life. But we didn't know those things. We're talking about the early 70s. We're talking about African Americans. You know, we didn't have no problems. And if we did, we didn't acknowledge them back then. Tell the truth, shame the devil. So that's my cute little story in regards to that. I was always interested in school, did very well in school. I started kindergarten very early. I was 4 years old when I started kindergarten. Therefore, I was 17 when I graduated high school. Always an honor roll student. I graduated 10th out of my class out of 252 students, so I was in the top 10. Um, when I graduated high school, I was I had already received two offers for scholarships, one locally and one out of town. Of course, I took the one out of town because I was ready to go. So I didn't have to pay to go to school. Um, Always, never had a problem with studying or, anything like that. Um, and so I was a nerd, needless to say. Um, but I did have a bit of, as far as the weight goes, I was a chubby baby, I was a chubby kid, and I stayed chubby until I was maybe seventh grade. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to review the video, I did a video. I don't know if I've uploaded it yet. I may have. Called Religious Bullies, and I briefly shared where I was bullied in school, not only because of my shyness, but I was bullied because of my weight. I was awkward because of it. Um, because I stayed fat up until I was about maybe seventh grade, and the only reason why I lost weight was because my menstrual cycle started, and when that came around, I didn't want to eat, and my mother had to make me eat, so I lost a ton of weight, and so I was able to, lose my weight, get my girlishness, get my little figure going on, and then of course boys came along, which I have a ton of stories about that. Some of them I can't share on YouTube, unfortunately. But yeah, maybe I should write a book about that. But might become a millionaire. Um, but anyway, yeah. So check out that the video Religious Bullies, where I briefly share about this. I'm very familiar about the bullying situation. But so that's basically my background in regards to my childhood. As an adult, I did go to college, and I briefly shared with you last week in regards to what happened with that, where I went for a couple of years, and tragically I lost my mother due to a car accident in my sophomore years. I was about 19, and shortly after that I dropped out, and I met my ex-husband, who was, he was in the Army at the time, and went on to become a military wife, and eventually after, having my daughter and going through divorce, over a period of time I wound up having to, and I do apologize, my computer again. I'm trying to do some work at the same time, multitasking. Um, at the age of, was that 36? At the age of 36, I went back to college and wanted to take care of the unfinished business of getting my undergraduate degree, which I did. So I'll talk a little bit about that in another video because I think it's important to encourage people to try to take care of unfinished business. And for those of you who are hesitant, who are adults, and think that you're too old to go back to school, you think you're too old to learn this, that, and the other, I want to share a story about an 80-year-old lady who went back to school to get her psych degree and actually graduated with honors in my class. And yeah, and she went to school full time. She was 77 when she started, and she got her 4-year degree in 3 years. Yep, and got accepted into graduate school. I don't know where she is now, but I think that was kind of like a bucket list thing that she wanted to do. But I mean, she was just on top of things, and I think that was wonderful. So I'll talk to you guys about that later on. But that's basically my upbringing. As far as my mother's career is concerned, when her and my father were married in the early years, um, she worked in hospitality, mostly in fine dining, restaurants, prep cook, bakery, sous chef. Um, but by the time, her and my father were well into, I think in the early part of their marriage when my brother was little, she was still working in the restaurants. But by the time I came along, my father was doing very well financially, and she was a homemaker, and she ran the home very well. So, very traditional home. And thank you for those who are popping in and out. Appreciate you coming in, saying hello. Um, and also, by the time I was 6 years old, my baby sister came along. Um, and so it was a situation was because of the age gaps in the house. There were no more than 2 kids in the house at the same time. So shortly after my baby sister came along, my brother graduated high school because I told you he was older than me. So he graduated high school and moved on out the house and went off to school, postgraduate school, to get his certification, in broadcasting. And I mentioned before that, he's currently still in broadcasting. And he got into it very early as a teenager, working under my father's guidance. But I'm going to let him tell that story. I'm not going to tell that story because there's a lot that I don't know that I didn't have access to. But I want to thank you all for coming here. I've been talking for 32 minutes. I can't believe that. But anyway, I wanted to give you mostly a background because I know normally in my format I told you I was going to do current events, but I did promise you last week I wanted to give you a background as to who I was and where I came from. So yes, I'm a Georgia peach. That's where I came from. And I'm also what they call a Geechee girl because for those of you who know about Savannah, it's near the Ogeechee River, swampland. So, and we're also, Gullah culture, so to speak, so you can look that up as well. I also have my other channel called the PG Pathfinder, does travel, lifestyles, and trails. I do have some cooking shorts where I show some of my dishes, and wanted to let you know I'm currently working on an e-cookbook. My goal is to have that released in the fall. I'm shooting for September, where I'm doing it in volumes, where I'm going to do 20 recipes per volume, and I'm working on the last two. But in the meantime, what I'm doing is I'm just uploading the shorts to give you an idea of what the recipes look like, kind of as teasers. But once I get that put together, because I'm trying to work with Google Docs to put it together, I've never done an e-cookbook before, and I want to make sure it's right for you guys. But once I do, I will give those details to you. But I will have those details on my channel, the Peachy Pathfinder. So if you're interested in cooking and travel and lifestyles, check that channel out. Sub if you would like to. I appreciate your support. Just show some of the places where I've been and some of the things that I've done, because I do like to travel and like to get out, see different things in different places. And also, I do appreciate your support in regards to my daily uploads because I do have a message to share. And before I go, I want to share the inspiration in regards to why I did the messages as well, because I think I mentioned last week as the inspiration in regards to that. There is a video, and I think I'm going to pin that in the description of this live later on, called Why I Walk, my testimony. It was originally aired on the Peachy Pathfinder channel, but I briefly talked about where I had a battle with opioid addiction some time ago. This past April indicates 15 years clean from that addiction. But when I went through rehab, they try to help you to focus on something that will take you away from the addiction, where you can stay clean. And I started doing walking as a way to rechannel my addiction. And that's where I got involved in power walking and nature walking and meditation and yoga and things like that to kind of help me. And during that time as well, when you're going through it, for those of you who've done any type of therapy, whether it's rehab, addiction rehab, or any type of psychological therapy or anything like that, they always encourage you to keep a journal. And I've always kept a lot of journals and notes and things like that. And like I said, this was many years ago, but I've always kept those notes. And there was a period of time also, and I'm going to share this a little bit later, where several years ago I was homeless for a short period of time. That's a story I'm going to share with you guys as well, which was rather interesting. Um, it wasn't a situation where I lost a job, but it was a scam situation, as a matter of fact. I'll tell you about it next week. But during that time, I also kept a journal, because that kind of helped me, rechannel my feelings and help me come up with a plan as to how to change my circumstance. And I had a lot of those notes. Well, unfortunately, back in 2019, my father passed. And shortly after he passed away, and I came back to Virginia, because I live in Virginia. When I came back to my place in Virginia, I was just doing some general cleaning, and I found my box full of notes from rehab from many, many years ago. And I guess it was the Creator just speaking to me and telling me, I was like, you know what, I've had these notes and I've been carrying them from pillar to post for years and don't know what to do with them. And I was like, Spirit, just tell me what to do with these notes, because I don't know what to do with them. I tossed around the idea of publishing a book, but I was like, how many people have written books about their rehab experience? Do I want to go through that arena? Do I want, first of all, do I have the money to self-publish? Do I have the time to commit to it? Because I got to do a job and everything else. How do I get myself out there where I can get my messages out now? How do I do it where I can let people know what's going on and help them understand where I'm coming from and share my messages, instead of just slapping a book in their hand? Can I just tell them a little bit at a time instead of just slapping a book in their hand and telling them to read it? And when I started watching other people's testimonies online, it was like, you know what? Why don't you go on Instagram and start talking? And that's what I did. So during the post-lockdown in 2021, I went ahead and started the Instagram channel and developed a following there. But then some of the people on Instagram would be like, you need to take this over to YouTube, because you'll get a real strong following over there. But I never had the nerve to do it, because you're talking about two totally different animals, okay? Each social media outlet is different. I already had the channel with the Peachy Pathfinder here, and I was trying to do that. And I wasn't sure whether or not it was work over here. So I went ahead and I created the REGGIRT channel last year, and I started uploading the videos daily. And I said to myself, a lot of them were listed to private, because I just didn't have the confidence. I didn't think the messages were going to do anything. So all those notes that I had from rehab, what I did is I just started reading them into my audio files on my cell phone. And I was saying to myself, okay, I've done these audio files, so now I have to put a picture to it. Should I put my face to it? Should I do cartoons? What should I do? And at the time I was having trouble sleeping, and I used to go to sleep to nature sounds. And that would help me go to sleep at night. And I said, well, why don't I put these nature pictures to these audios and see what happens? And when I started doing that on Instagram and developed a following, I said, well, maybe it'll work on YouTube. So I just started recreating, taking those same videos. And I said, well, I'll go ahead and do that. So I started developing my playlists, month by month for YouTube. And I said, I'll see what happens. So just recently, I started releasing them to the public in a way where I said, I'm just going to keep doing this and doing this. If I just get one view, no view, I don't care. I'm going to just go upload every day. Just upload, upload. This is going to catch on eventually. And it took me a while. It did. I think I stated, I want to say, I forgot how low subscribers I had. I want to say I only had maybe 8 subscribers at first. And then I went up to 260 something for a good while. I think I stayed at 200 and something for months. And I think this past month, all of a sudden, I jumped up to over 1,000. So now I'm like at 1,300 at the time of this video. So you just got to keep trying. It's a time-consuming process. But I said to myself, I'm not going to worry about numbers. I'm just going to keep posting every single day. It's going to catch on. And I just started my Facebook page a few weeks ago. I was hoping to go live, but I didn't pay attention to the guidelines that they had in regards to that. You have to have your page active for a little while. So I'm not going to be able to go live on Facebook for those of you who do both. I won't be able to do that until August, where I could be able to do the live simultaneously between here and Facebook. So I do apologize for that. But I do appreciate you guys coming here today. But that's what I did. Everything, all the messages that I give you are based on journal entries that I made when I was in rehab, and also thoughts and journal entries that I made when I was homeless. The rehab I did was between the time of 2009 and 2011. Those were some of the notes, and also some of the notes that I took when I was in the homeless situation in 2015. So between those years, off and on, even when I got out to rehab, from time to time I would write something up. But that's where a lot of my inspiration came from a lot of these messages were notes that I had to take in rehab that got me through. Because your mind is just going berserk. Withdrawal is one of the most difficult things in rehab, and your mind just goes all these places. So you have to have an outlet sometimes, and that's what was needed. So, as I stated before, I was cleaning some things out after I returned from my father's funeral, when I was at home and I didn't know what to do with the notes, and I just started putting them, putting my voice to them, started creating the videos, uploaded to IG, and eventually moved everything to YouTube, and here I am doing lives on Sunday morning. So here we go. Anyway, I kind of hope this inspires someone. We are at 43 minutes now. I've been going on and on, but I kind of hope this helps someone. If you have a similar story, I know it's kind of an unusual background. That was my childhood in a nutshell. Let me know. You know, um, I'm sure I'm not the only one who had an unusual childhood, a creative one, needless to say. But if you want to say hello, you can also reach out to me via my Yahoo, which is REGGIRT, REGGIRT, at myyahoo.com. I also have a Gmail for my Peachy Pathfinder, it's peachypathfinder@gmail.com if you want to hit me up over there. I also have a Facebook page for both, which is Peachy Pathfinder on Facebook, REGGIRT on Facebook. My Instagram page for the Peachy Pathfinder is still up for now. I still have some of my lives up there from when I did, some of my REGGIRT from 2022 and some of 2021. If you're interested in watching some of those, I'm thinking about packaging some of those up into video form and moving them over to YouTube. Seriously thinking about doing that and just creating a playlist for you guys to enjoy. I thank you very much for joining me today. And again, I appreciate your ongoing support as we grow. And again, the videos are uploaded daily, 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time. And again, I thank you very much for coming in today. And I wish you peace, prosperity, protection, and power.